Hi everyone, it's Christina and Sarah here. We did this little thing last year where we got together and discussed our most impactful reads of the year, and we had a really great response. So we decided to do it again this year and every year going forward. So what we're going to do is we're going to share what our most impactful reads were. Some of them are the same because we're in a book club together and we read them together and kind of go off and read our own things as well. So let's get into it. First, I think this is on both of our list, was Shoe Dog by Phil Knight, and which basically the story of how Nike started, right? It's Phil basically tells a story like right even before it started. So what he was doing, talks about running. And I was reviewing this a little bit more on my notes, and I realized it had so much more than just about like business stuff. It was like just in general how he lived his life, how he took risks, and how he traveled and all that kind of stuff. And it's just inspiring on so many levels, just a really raw story. And I think the thing that always sticks in my mind about the book is how there were so many times when things like didn't go well, and it could have just the whole business could have completely disappeared. Or actually some of the times when Phil didn't think it would work himself. Do you know what I mean? You hear all these stories where founders are like, oh, it was all really difficult, but I knew we were going to make it. Sometimes he was like, oh, I didn't think this was really going to be a big thing, so I got a job on the side and all that kind of stuff. It was just so real and just, yeah, really made me respect Nike on a whole other level.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I think it kind of hit us quite quickly, didn't it, the book? I think I definitely wouldn't have picked this book up if it wasn't for book club, because I had a whole story about Nike that I was like, just don't know if I really care enough to read it. But I think, like you said, at right from the beginning, it ends up being quite a very personal journey about an individual starting up a business, right? And I think that immediately was very relatable. And I think I had this perception, I think the same when we read That Will Never Work last year, this story about Netflix, where you see these big brands and you just think your business isn't at all related to where they are and how they started. And the same way that book surprised me of actually how much I could relate to, I felt the same with this as well. I think I was also reflecting on my notes, like I don't know if this is something that the editor did on purpose, but I kind of felt like the essence of their tagline, "Just do it," was just throughout the book, wasn't it? It was like something came up and they just took the next step, or they just sat around, thought about what to do, and just kept doing it, right? Kept taking the next step, which I thought was really, I think, very inspiring, because you only ever see normally the kind of, I guess, success at the end of the business. And even this, what is it, like 10 years, 20 years down the line or something, and they're still trying to figure out what they're doing and if it's going to be successful or not, right? So it's that time period like really gives you perspective of it, right? So I think that's why it was one of the top ones for me as well. It just really surprised me as a book. I wasn't expecting what we read.
Yeah, there's just something so powerful about reading about the humble beginnings of these big businesses that we just live with today. You don't really relate to them because they're so huge. So yeah, just like the Netflix book, really, really interesting just to go right back to the beginning and hear about all their trials and tribulations. Really, really good read. Another thing that's really powerful to do is to look at your childhood and reflect back on your life. So one of my favorite books this year was How to Overcome Your Childhood by School of Life, which sounds like something that people should read if they had really traumatic childhoods, but actually that's totally wrong. It's something that everybody should read, just to explore why they are the way they are, no matter what kind of childhood you had. And it's a really small, I've actually got it over here, it's a very small, super easy to read book. Lovely cover. And I literally devoured it in like a couple of days, I think. And I took so many notes that I basically wrote down half of the book. But the main kind of gist at the beginning is saying that it's your responsibility to determine the logic of your own neuroses, your own like attitude and behaviors, to avoid passing it down to the next generation. And it just covers it in such a simple and accessible way, where it says, do you tend to behave in these kind of ways? This is why it might be. And then you just kind of take it apart, and just a really easy to consume book that I'd highly recommend.
It's the School of Life, isn't it? Yeah, they're so good at taking really, I guess, big topics and making them super accessible in different ways. We read a book last year as well, wasn't it? The emotional education, again, that was just every single page is so valuable, but also so accessible, which I think is a really hard thing to do on that kind of topic. So that sounds really good.
I think it's one of our goals to get a whole bookshelf of School of Life books.
Love it. That's actually interesting. Yeah, the book that I was going to mention on a very similar kind of vein is one that I have read before, but about maybe like 6 years ago now, called The Power Up Now. One of those books a lot of people talk about, but very similarly, that's kind of what it is for me, of like understanding how we see the world, I guess, and how we specifically around the future and the past and how that impacts our everyday. And yeah, the kind of reason I picked it up, I recommended it to someone this year, and it just was suddenly there on my table. I just picked up, started reading it, and it was one of those books that it was just the right time to reread it. And it was really interesting also having such a different perspective reading it. Like, I definitely read things this time around that I just didn't take in. And we've talked about this in book club before, haven't we, of like, I guess, kind of going back to books at different points in your life, because your mindset has changed and how you see the world has changed, and suddenly things you can actually read in a very different way, or you read things that you might have completely just not understood or missed.
Yeah.
And that was, yeah, for me, like, really nice to do. But also I think one thing I've really taken from it this time is this kind of concept I've grew up a lot with. So I kind of obviously grew up in India, where, you know, a kind of Buddhist kind of way of thinking and Stoic philosophies was very kind of ingrained in it. And people always talk about like detaching yourself from your thoughts, and like, you are not your thoughts, which sounds very nice as a concept, but I've never actually been able to, like, I guess, get to that point. But there's something in the way that Eckhart writes. He kind of breaks things down. So if you literally pick up the book in this kind of maybe like negative headspace, read through something and understand it, and then feel that, like, oh yeah, I'm not that thought, and then literally like put the book down, being completely different mood, and people are like, you've shifted so much. I'm like, I know. Yeah. This book is incredible. So it's the only book I've ever had that really has allowed me to, I mean, I'm not in that state all the time. It's definitely a habit you have to build, but it was really powerful in that way. So yeah, it's one I've recommended to you if I had to.
Yes, it's on the list for sure. Is it quite, would you say it's quite a practical book, or is it more like is it quite spiritual? Like, I at first when I heard, I thought it was a productivity book, but it's not. It's
I think I think it will probably be a little bit like Marmite for some people. Some people probably don't like it because it is, his perspective comes from a spiritual space, and also like it's a whole section about religion as well that can, for some people, just not right. And I think you have to go into it a little bit open-minded. And with most books, sometimes it's just the way it's written might not sit for people. But I think for me, if you look through that and just look at the kind of content itself, I think, like a little bit like you mentioned about the School of Life, it just breaks down something very, I haven't heard like written before in this way, that it's still really accessible. And yeah, I mean, the thing to me that both times I picked up this book, it's made a massive difference in my life. So there's something in it for me.
Love that. And I love a Marmite book, because when you get a good debate going,
true,
people love it. Some people, there's got to be something good in that.
Exactly.
My other book that I wanted to mention is one that Sarah's been going on about at me to read for ages, and I finally read it, which is Clockwork, and by Mike Alowitz. Got it. And it's basically, as it kind of sounds, it's to help you design your business to run itself. And I'd say it's pretty relevant to any kind of business, really. Whether you are trying to kind of create a lifestyle business where you go on holiday all the time, or even if you are running a traditional business or tech startup, whatever, there's something in there for everybody, I think. And it touched on tools that I have never heard of anywhere else, or maybe I haven't heard of them put in that way. Do you know what I mean? Like it, just the way that you would define roles, the way that you would basically look at all the stuff you do in your business, prioritize it. It sounds like simple stuff, but the way that the kind of tools that he puts in place are just so practical. And I read the book and I applied them all as I went through. And I have used them ever since I've read that book. Like, it's been a huge mindset shift on how you view the tasks in your business and how you hire people, how you distribute work, all that kind of stuff. And it's kind of like, I can't remember if I read it in this book or if it was actually in the Netflix book. I'm confusing books now, but there was something about running your business and the team like a sports team. So you kind of do the design work and then you watch the field sort of thing. I can't remember if it was this one or the other one, but it's a very similar type of thing where you spend the time doing the design and then it all runs like clockwork. So super recommend this book as well, and I have to so many people.
I completely that. I think what's really interesting about it is, one, it's very practical, like you said, but what you said right now I think is really accurate in terms of mindset shift. I think it's one of the first books that have both been practical and actually it shifted how I thought about my business. I think the concept he talks about is, or I guess the goal for yourself after reading the book is like, when can you go away for, like, let's say 4 weeks and the business would still run without you? And I think I'd never really thought of my engagement in the business in that way, like that it would be possible. I think for me that really shifted for me quite a lot when I read it. I was like, oh, actually, what if I actually could grow a business that continued beyond just me as an individual? And then the very practical things you can start doing to understand where you should focus your time and where you should be delegating and who should be delegating to and how can you find those amazing people. I'm glad you picked it up. It was really, really, really useful, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Cool. So my other one is a really interesting one that's been on my list for ages. And it's massively underrated, this book, because it was also written 17 years ago, I think. I actually lost the cover, so it looks old. It looks like an old book from the library. And it is Hackers and Painters by Paul Graham. The reason I even found this book was because Paul Graham's the founder of Y Combinator, which is, one of the world's biggest accelerators. And he actually wrote this book way before he even started that, when he was, starting tech startups and he was coding and all that kind of stuff. And so I heard about this book from there. It doesn't have like loads of reviews. It's like super underrated, but it is really, really interesting because he basically talks about, it's called Hackers and Painters because he talks about how the world is going to be designed and is designed by hackers and painters. So people who, engineer things and hack things, and then people who create art and are creative about things. And it just had so much stuff in there that I didn't expect. So I expected a really techie book, right, about coders and how they're going to change tech and all that kind of stuff. And the whole first couple of chapters is about the schooling system and how it's not structured in the right way to help hackers and painters thrive, and why people are motivated to be hackers and painters and all that kind of stuff. So it was just really not one of those really delightful books that you just don't expect it to give you what it does. And he also predicts what's going to happen with technology in the future. Which obviously this was 17 years ago, so a lot has come through. So it's really interesting to read how he was talking about it before. I think the description of the book is like, oh, you no longer have a fax machine and this is happening, so the world's changing. And so he kind of predicts what's going to happen a couple of decades in. So I loved it for that. There's a couple of really technical chapters in it about coding and the future of programming languages, which I kind of went over me a little bit, but still worth the read, I'd say, if you're interested in tech. And it made me think that I really want to find more books that were written a couple of decades ago that tried to predict the future. If anybody knows of any of those books, recommend them, because I want to find them and I want to read them really.
And would you say that, what kind of book was this for you? Was it something that was inspirational? Was it practical? Has it shifted your mindset?
I think it was, the way that I would describe it is it was a mind opener, because it talked about, and actually a big concept that runs through the book is about not accepting things for how they are. So it's kind of like, it even had a bit of that interesting mindset thing there, which you don't expect from a techie book, about how this is the system, this is how you grow up. But if you want to really change things and you want to grow as a person, then you need to question everything that you know. And so, and also it gives you loads of concepts to question. So big mind opener, and a bit of a mindset shift as well around how you look at things.
It sounds also really empowering for people who maybe feel like they don't fit into the system in the world, right? To actually go like, oh, it's not just me that feels that, and the way the world isn't designed for me, right? I think it's quite empowering to read as well.
Absolutely, yeah.
So I was thinking about some of the books I wanted to mention. I wanted to mention one because it's quite different to the other kind of books we were reading, but I think also it had an impact on me this year because the right book for the right time, basically. So I think it was only a couple of days before we decided to read this book, I had decided to go sober for a month, because, you know, why not try it out? There's definitely something that's kind of been coming up as a thread for me this year, last year. So we decided to read The Unexpected Joy of Being Sober by Catherine Gray, which is also nice because she is a Brightonian as well. So we're all pretty excited to read someone's book from an author that's local. Because at the very beginning of the book, Catherine reads out the definition and the synonyms of sober, which I've got written down. So it's serious, sensible, and solemn, and muted in colour, plain, conservative, unadventurous. And the antonyms are light-hearted, sensational, and emotional. And I realised that's exactly what my narrative was for alcohol and what it brought to my life versus what my expectation of sober like meant. And that was, I think, a really good place to start that month of going, okay, that is the narrative that I have, that, you know, society kind of creates. Is that actually accurate or not? So I think that really helped shape the kind of month that I've had, and the impact it's had, I guess, also for me around my relationship with alcohol. Kind of hit me in the face a little bit of like, oh, I didn't even realize that was my narrative, you know. So I thought it was really interesting,
and it sparked a lot of good conversation in the book club as well about just because it's something, obviously drinking is so widely accepted and it's just something that we do. You don't really kind of like talk about it, and if you don't drink, that's weird and all that kind of stuff. So I think it brought up so many interesting conversations, and we realized how many people are actually sober or sober curious, you know. And I think like having more of those conversations is just like so valuable as well. So I think whether you are looking to be sober or you're just curious or whatever, it's just so worth reading.
Right. I think the other thing I really liked about the book was actually the narrative as well. She's very raw and honest.
It's really fun to read.
I mean, I love that when people can really like it. Again, it was actually, I couldn't put it down because it was really like, oh my gosh, this is like, it was that kind of energy.
So we both read 7 Habits this year, which I always struggle to pin down like what the main thing is about this book, because it's kind of like the Bible of personal development. Like it's all the foundational development stuff that all books were written about. That's kind of how I would see it, right? It's very
practical. I think the way that it's broken down into like kind of 7 habits. I focus a little bit more on kind of like habit 1 in terms of thinking about what I took away, because I think it was in itself really powerful. And habit 1 is you are the creator. And it really is, I guess, I felt quite empowered having read it to really believe that whatever you want to do in the world, you can create. And it touches upon things like regret and shame, which I think as well really hold people back quite a lot, and how to just like get past those barriers just to keep on creating what you want in the world as well. So I think it was one of those books, I think if you feel like the world is happening to you and you want to, I guess, do something differently, I feel like this kind of book really helped with going, actually, what can you do to change how your life is? And in a very kind of practical, again, it's very simple, but you know that it's packed full of like all of this knowledge and base and foundation, right? That they understand that if people can have more of these insights for themselves, they can actually do really big things in the world.
Totally. And it actually covers like so many different things that are useful for life. It even talked about negotiation at one point, and productivity, and like self-care and all that kind of stuff. And it was it's quite a lot to get through. And I wasn't sure if I wanted to halfway through, I think, but eventually I did, and I'm so glad I did, because there's a lot of good stuff towards the end.
I also think it's one of those books I definitely have to read again, because there was so much to digest.
Exactly.
I want to go back and reread it again because there was so much in it, right?
I think my biggest takeaway from that book was around I can't remember which habit it was now, but it was around the productivity side of things. And when it talks about the matrix of urgent, not important, all that kind of stuff, which I think a lot of people know about. And I knew about it before, but the way that he described it left such a lasting imprint on me. And I have been applying it ever since. It was just more around like, anybody you do that kind of task with, it's like everybody puts everything into urgent and important. And the idea I always had was like, right, get through that list so you can do the non-urgent stuff. But actually it's more about kind of sacrificing those to put in the time to create the long-term effects of the important, not urgent stuff. It sounds very complicated now that I'm explaining it, but so I don't know, it was the thing that really hit home for me, because I'm always that kind of person that's like, oh, I've got so much to do, urgent, everything's important. So changing that, it really changed that kind of thought process for me, which I really liked. But if people were to take away, if they were only to read one book out of everything that we talked about, what would you say they should go and read right now?
I mean, you know that both the two books I've mentioned to you to read were Power of Now and Clockwork. So I think I would say Power of Now, just because I think we need to understand more about who we are to be able to do anything, including starting up a business. So I'm going to go with Power of Now. How about you?
Yeah, I was actually thinking, for me, it would be between Overcoming Childhood and Clockwork. For the same reasons that actually before you can, create a great business, you should overcome your childhood first. So and actually, like 7 Habits is also a really great foundational book, but it might not be as accessible because it's a bit longer and like you have to kind of get through it. Whereas How to Overcome Your Childhood, everybody could go and read that now, like this week, and learn something about themselves. So Power of Now, How to Overcome Your Childhood, everybody go read it. Tell us what you think of them.
Yeah, Christina started a book club. It was nearly 2 years ago. And I started just turning up and never finishing my books. That was the beginning, but was still had the accountability and the determination, right, to do that. And now I think I've read 14 books this year, and I'm just so aware of how much they've offered to me in my mindset and what I'm able to do. So we've got an invitation to anyone who is listening to this and going, oh, these sounds like really cool books, but maybe you're at the point where you're like, I don't know how I'm going to read them. I haven't read anything last year. Wherever you are, we are a small group of people who are just very curious, read all sorts of little books, from the kind of more business side, personal development, all about just leveling ourselves up as human beings. So do come and join us. We'll link in the blog of where you can kind of go to find out more. Meet once a month, online or in person. We're kind of trying to figure that out still, aren't we?
Yeah, and it's free. We just do it for fun. So
just do it for fun and support for each other. And the discussions are great, right? We've touched on that a little bit already on this call.
I always say it's my favorite time of the month because I always look forward to it. And you read books differently, don't you, when you're going to discuss it with people, because you've got kind of like, oh, I'm going to have to talk about this bit, so I'm going to note it down, I'm going to really remember it. So you just start to read books quite differently.
I think scientifically as well, that's meant to prove that you're meant to retain information more as well if you're going to share it with someone else. So
7 Habits, they tell you that at the beginning. It's all going in.
Also, well, I hope you guys found that useful. Like Christina said, if you've got any book recommendations as well, do let us know. We always democratically vote on books through the book club as well. We're reading The Donut Economics this month. So any other recommendations, do let us know so we can pop them into our reading list too. All right, bye guys.
Bye.